This is a really lovely article, and recently someone wrote in and asked me to do a video for it. So I'm doing it for her. This article is all about diet protein and potassium and kidney stone risk. And it doesn't get a lot of reads, but it really ought to, because it tells you a lot about how to manage your diet in these areas. And I think one reason it doesn't get a lot of reads is because it looks a little forbidding, and people just figure, well, I don't need to aggravate myself. So the first part, which I'm leafing through, is what I like, which is, what kind of science was this? And was it about what to do? Yes. Was it about knowing something about how nature does things? Yes. And so it's got a lot of formalism in it. What you need to know is that protein looks like a two-edged sword. On the one hand, of course, it's good for you. On the other hand, it imposes an acid load that can reduce bone mineral in principle and raise urine calcium. And then protein can also raise urine calcium just because it's protein. So that sounds bad, right? If you have calcium stones, it sounds like it's going to make the stones worse. So that's where they started. The idea they had was more protein would give you more calcium in the urine, and that the acid load from the protein would lower the citrate. That's the urine citrate. I didn't bold it here, but I'm bolding it now. And that would be bad because citrate protects against stones. So they, the authors, are epidemiologists. They have 3 wonderful cohorts, 2 women cohorts and 1 male cohort. And they looked at their cohort and asked about relative risk of becoming a kidney stone former versus the gram per day of protein. This isn't gram per kilo per day like we often talk about. It's gram per day of protein. Now, each of these bars shows the relative risk of becoming a stone former. The mean relative risk is at the top of the bar. And the bottom is the lower 95th percentile. So values above 1 means risk went up. Values below 1 means risk went down. Values that cross the line means it doesn't differ from 0, like this went up, but the lower 95th percentile is down here. This is just animal protein, grams per day, what they ate. You can see right away it doesn't make any difference at all. In other words, nothing matters. So animal protein does not raise risk. Now you say, well, what about this little bar at the very tippy top, 62.7 gram per day or more? The upper bar is just around 1.09 or something. It's about maybe 9-10% increase. And the bottom doesn't go below 0, so this is a little bit of a risk. Yes, it's very, very, very tiny. And then bottom here I put some statistical stuff. Basically the answer is no. Vegetable protein simply didn't do anything. It just didn't do anything. So I didn't make a graph of it. If you want to read the paper, you can go read the supplemental tables. They didn't even put the whole table in because there's nothing to say. But dairy protein. Well, the mean risk ratio is now at the bottom of each of the light bars. The dairy protein kind of lowers the risk a little bit. This is going up in dairy protein, 8 up to greater than 22 gram. The top of the bar is the upper 95th percentile. So you say, Fred, you're confusing me. There's a fall in the relative risk, and the upper part of that fall is above 1. So this is a very significant fall. Here, the fall is not significant. The upper 95th percentile is above. It crosses the line. So these two are below the line. The fact that this intervening one is above means it's not solid. It kind of says if you get a lot of dairy protein, maybe it's good. So, don't be aggravated now. What do I say about dairy protein? It's not an evil. Maybe a little good for you, for stones. Animal protein is not an evil. Maybe a little bad for you at the worst upper end. Put another way, protein is not a big deal. You're wasting a lot of energy if you put your energy there. I'm going to go over this, which is what I love about Karl Popper and about various aspects of falsification theory, and simply say, altogether, protein in the diet isn't a big deal. What about potassium? Well, potassium is from your veggies. And here I've plotted the women, the red cohorts, there's 2 of them, and the men, that's 1 cohort in blue, red and blue. And this is relative risk becoming a stone former as you have more and more diet potassium. And here you see pretty wild stuff. All of these are below 1, and most of these upper 95th percentiles don't go anywhere near 1. So these are big reductions of relative risk. Very impressive. Well, how much potassium? Well, 60 to 71 and so forth, greater than 86 milliequivalent. Very impressive. How much is that? Well, multiply that by 39. I don't know, you do it. It's a few thousand milligram of potassium, right? It's a lot. But that's what you get by eating your veggies. What about men? Same thing. Look at this. This is very pure. This is down, and the upper 95th percentile is way down here. So, yes, very protective. Very protective. There's only 1 female cohort has 1 smidgy of a bar above 1. It's protective across all the quintiles. What does it mean? Eat your veggies. Get this kind of potassium intake. So that's good. Now here's some pretty graphs that I just love. How well do the diet potassium intake estimates, remember what these are fancy diet questionnaires, predict the real urine potassium? Very well, thank you. There's an offset. When people say they're eating 80, the urine is really 60 because you don't maybe absorb all the potassium. So an offset. This is the line of identity. This could be biology. Huh? What about potassium intake versus urine citrate? Citrate's protective against stones. The answer is yeah. There's a general slope. It's not nice. It's sloppy looking, right? These error bars are pretty wide. But the general tendency is very significant. What about urine pH? It ought to go up, right? Because vegetables are alkaline. This potassium that you're eating isn't potassium chloride. It's potassium alkali. It's just like potassium citrate. Sure enough, pH goes nicely up. But don't worry about it, because this is the range in which you won't make calcium phosphate stones out of this potassium load. Here's a funny one. Urine volume goes up with a higher potassium intake. What do you make of that? I think that's wonderful. I think it's because the fruits and veggies have an awful lot of water. Think about eating a steak versus eating oranges, equal weight of oranges, or grapes, or watermelon, or honeydew melon, or whatever you want to eat. Veggies just made out of water. So when you have more veggies, you have more water. What's the bottom line? Well, eat your meat and enjoy it. And just have a good time eating it. and don't think much about it. Red meat, white meat, fish, it's all the same. Sounds evil, but it isn't a stone risk. What about your veggies? Fabulous. Eat them. This stuff here, the protein to potassium ratio, I didn't like it much. You can tell from the way I wrote about it. And I don't want to spend too much time with it. What do we have for those of you who are patients? Eat your fruits and veggies. Past fears of animal protein seem bogus. That's very nicely put, don't you think? Massive protein intake beyond a certain point can really be evil. What am I saying? Jock types who just have to down their protein powders and their protein bars and their protein this and that way, way above 1.1 or 1.2 gram per kilo per day. Nobody endorses that. That's just not smart. I think it's basically not even good for muscle building, but that's my prejudice. At the bottom is an important little note. Eric Taylor, who honchoed this work, was kind enough to read this article for me. That's putting him to a lot of work. And I rewrote a couple aspects of the text to be sure it's in line with his thinking. But he was satisfied, and he accepts what I'm saying is accurate. And that's a good thing. Well, I'm Fred Coe. I hope you enjoyed my little walkthrough, and I hope you enjoy the article and tell your friends about it, and maybe get a few more reads. Bye-bye.